systems ready.
Hello and welcome to today's Battle Mech review. Today we're going to be looking at the Supernova, who's one of those things that likes to overeat quite a bit. Just like its smaller cousin, the Nova, it likes to have big lasers in the arm, and shooting them will cause your entire mech to change colors over time just because of how much heat it actually generates. It is generally pointed as a Nova Cat mech, mostly because that's who built the majority of them in the inner sphere, even though it's not really a Nova Cat mech. It's just more of a general clan mech that the Nova Cats adopted because that's what they were able to build. It has also a variety of subvariants, both from before the clan invasion and after the clan invasion, so we're going to be looking at a large number of different Supernova types and have some fun looking at them. So let's get into it. Inner Sphere analysts really thought the Supernova was the upgrade to the ubiquitous Nova when they first met with them. The Nova is more commonly known as the Blackhawk in the Inner Sphere, and you'll have the Blackhawk KU and the Blackhawk Regular, and that's another one that can get confusing. The Supernova, however, predates the Nova by about 25 years, and it is a pre-Omni-Mech design. The Nova is one of the first Omni-Mechs, well, not one of the real first, but one of the first big ones. Let's say one that is still around and one that is still quite popular. Clan Nova Cat was the one that were known for using them the most, mostly because when they needed to rebuild their Tomon after their abjuration, well, that's what they had on hand. And they also used quite a few during the invasion, not only in second-line forces, but also in some front-line forces, except on Tukayid, because on Tukayid you only brought Omni-Mechs to get squashed by the Comstar guys. The Supernova was a common sight when you were raiding on various clan worlds during that period, because it was a very decent command mech for your garrison forces. Having learned more of the history of the Supernova, you're going to have some quite silly people out there pointing that the Supernova shows how poorly the clans were managed and how poorly the clans were doing at the start of the clan era, etc. This design was originally designed as a response to the lack of AC-20 reloads for the somewhat rare and rather still popular SLDF King Crab. The King Crab is a decent enough mech. You're going to see a good amount of them floating around, and the clans had a decent number of them in their inventory. The problem was that the weapons that it used, the standard AC-20, well, they weren't being built anymore. And not just the gun itself, but the shells to be used in that kind of gun. The Ultra AC-20 came out in 28-25, the standardized LB-20X came out in 28-26. So the standard AC-20 was just absolutely useless compared to both of these more modern weapons. The shells to be built for the King Crabs were just not being produced, and you had King Crabs and King Crabs lookalikes floating around that couldn't shoot. The better thing to do would be to evolve the design or modify it to something a little bit more rational. And I think this is what the original King Crab replacement was supposed to be, with the Supernova that is sometimes now nicknamed the Boiler. This one mounts an Ultra AC-20 in each arm with entirely too few ammo, just 2 tons, which will allow you to punch big holes into enemies' armor if they don't jam. Your shoulder mounts a 15 rack of LRMs and a large pulse laser, just like the original King Crab, just a little bit smaller, a little bit, well, I was going to say nimbler. Well, it can jump, that's the difference. And it was cooled by 17 double heat sinks, meaning that it could shoot most of its weapon and not kill itself. This thing never really reached full production, but it was the original design for the Supernova, I believe, and fixed this particular body shape that has been used ever since. As the Boiler probably had some issues due to the fact that it couldn't fight for very long, the Supernova was basically set up as a energy-based King Crab capable of taking down another mech in a single volley, but not having to rely on silly things like ammunition reloads. The original prototype used the King Crab chassis and armor, but this was kind of a bust, so they removed the ferrofibrous plates, which were kind of too bulky to accommodate the extra heat sinks that you would need on a full energy weapon-based mech, and they made the design a little bit smaller at 90 ton, to, well, probably help with deployment. Those revisions and those changes led to all sorts of fun things with the Supernova. Another big change was the replacement of the targeting computer to allow it to have a better accuracy at longer range, which is where the Supernova really shines, especially compared to a thing like the King Crab, which is really meant to be a close-range brawler. This makes the Supernova quite deadly with a variety of extended-range weapons, which we will see in a little bit. The end result, though, was the Supernova not using any super fancy technology, unlike most clan mech of its era. It's fairly simple, it's easy to repair, at least in terms of parts matching and parts making, and it is still quite a serious machine. For mobility, use a 270 engine to go to a speed of 54 kilometers per hour, coupled with 6 tons of jump jets to allow you to bounce 90 meters. This gives it an okay maneuverability for a mech its size. You get 14.5 tons of standard plates, which is ample protection on a mech that is supposed to stay a bit further back with its weapons. And the design is cooled by 26 double heat sinks, which is barely enough, because the weapons you have on this thing is a 3.0 of ER large laser in each arm, generating a total of 60 heat units. If we calculate it this way, 26 double heat sinks will manage to take out about 52. You're going to start feeling the heat really quickly, and your mech might shut down if you start shooting those things constantly. If you start bracket firing, or if you start doing some volley firing, it'll be a little bit better. And with 26 double heat sinks, well, you're not going to cook yourself if you shoot like 3 or 4 of them steadily. This Supernova was not the most common mech around because Omnimex took center stage fairly quickly after its release, but there were still quite a few different configurations prior to Operation Revival and afterwards as well. All of them really use a new chassis and endosteel setup, which makes it a little bit harder to repair but saves a decent amount of weight, which is pretty useful on a mech this size. Alpha variant is one that uses only 17 heat sinks because it changes the weapon loadout quite a bit. Each arm still features a single ER large laser, but the side torsos are now packed with missiles, with a 20 rack LRM with Artemis guidance and a 6 tube of Streak SRM. This makes the Supernova kind of a weird, heavy Timberwolf kind of deal. It's a little bit odd, especially when you look at all the other Supernovas, or at least the one most people know, but it's going to be able to do fairly well in fire support. It's got a decent amount of range with that targeting computer. It's going to be accurate as well. It is overall a very nice setup. You get 7 tons of ammo, generally set up as 3 tons of LRMs and 4 tons of Streak reloads, but this can be moved around. I've seen quite a few different things. I think that's the standard. And a lot of people have moved the ammo reloads around to try to feed the different weapons differently. Revo variant uses that same endosteel chassis, and that's what we're going to keep seeing here. And 18 double heat sinks to keep it cool, while there's 17 tons of plate to make sure that the darn thing stays in the fight just as long as it can. This design is really meant to be a brawler, with each arm now mounting a pair of large pulse lasers, making it extremely accurate. To complement this, you have an ER medium laser in each arm, 1 in the head and 1 in the center torso, making you somewhat of a zombie mech, but not quite a whole lot. All of this, though, is guided by a targeting computer, making you really deadly accurate with all of those weapons. This is probably one of the scariest Supernova, in my opinion. Charlie configuration bumps up the heat sinks to 22 to keep its massive weapon loadout cool. And this one also mounts twin large pulse lasers, but this time they're mounted in the torsos rather than the arms to be better protected and stay in the fight longer, because losing an arm is fairly common, losing a side torso is a lot harder. The arms, though, still have weapons with an ER medium laser and a medium pulse laser, so you've got a wide variety of weapons on there spread throughout the body, which in this case makes it the actual zombie variant of the Supernova. I haven't seen many of those around, but it does work fairly well. What you lose is on the arc of fire of those large pulse laser on torso-mounted weapons. It's more fixed forward, while on an arm you've got a wider swivel, But still, it works fairly well and is going to stay in the fight long enough to cause people some headaches. While those various designs exist, and I've seen them in the shop every once in a while, they weren't really common during the days of Operation Revival and the period after the Truce of Tukayid. There were not really any new Supernova designs around that era either until Clan Nova Cat was abjured, and they had to look at the list of mechs that they had available and the factories they had to see how to rebuild their Toman. Really, their options were quite limited. That's why you see a lot of standard mechs from Clan Nova Cats coming out. But they had Endosteel, they had the plans for the Supernova, so they kept going with that. Your Supernova Mark II came out of the factories at Irache in 3062 using modern technologies for the time, which is what made the Nova Cats quite fun. If you look at their designs, they might not have had the fancy Omnimex, but they had the fancy technologies that went along with them though. You have 17 tons of plate to make the darn thing stay in the fight as long as possible, but you only have 16 double heat sinks, which is a little bit tight on a machine like that. In terms of lasers, you only keep 2 ER large lasers with a targeting computer, giving you a decent amount of accuracy on them. But the now main weapon on the design are 4 ATM launchers in the shoulders and 9 tubes, so that's quite a lot of little missiles with 6 tons of reloads, allowing you to stay in the fight not as long as the armor that you have should let you believe. It's decent enough and it's going to be able to do decent bombardment. And if anything gets close and you start shooting high explosive ATMs, things are going to blow up fairly quickly. It is quite decent, but not one of my favorite design. The Nova Cats had the factories and they needed the mechs, so they kept building the Supernova in large amounts. The Mark III came out in 3064 and it was meant to be a Marauder 2 replacement, at least in my opinion. You get a targeting computer to guide your full energy weapon suite, and you got 23 double heat sinks to try to keep cool. Each arm now mounts an ER PPC and an ER large laser for decent enough sniping, while the head and the center torso mount a medium pulse laser at closer range, and giving you a bit of a zombie mech kind of capabilities. You get 17 tons of plates to make the darn thing stay on the field as long as possible, and it's overly decent enough. 3067 saw the production of the Mark IV starting, and this one still features the Endosteel targeting computer, 17 tons of plate, that standard kind of combo that we normally see now. This one packs 4 large pulse lasers, however, as its primary weapons, backed by 2 heavy medium lasers at very close range, at least very close range for clan weapons. You get 2 ER medium lasers in the torso and the head to round things up, with 18, good not quite enough, double heat sinks trying to cool the whole design down. It's not terrible. It's going to deal a very big amount of damage, and it's accurate enough that it's going to be a threat. Once again, the kind of thing that is a headache to anybody facing it. With the extermination of Clan Nova Cat, well, the Supernova could have disappeared, but Clan Sea Fox had gotten the plans for them and started building them on Angel 2. This one still uses the standard Endosteel chassis, and their new model uses 24 double heat sinks. Outside of that, it's a copy of the original, 6 ER large lasers in the arms, so you get a whole lot of punch, but you use the extra saved weight from that Endosteel chassis to put on some armor, and 4 cooling pods in order to allow you to rapidly cool down if you keep performing alpha strikes. This one will not have as long of a staying power, let's say, as your original Supernova, but you're going to be able to do a whole lot more damage in a very short period with those cooling pods. It's one of those things that I'd probably want to sit down and have a couple of simulations run between the different ones just to see which one ends up being the most efficient. And now, are there some weird refits for this Supernova? Well, it's kind of weird when looking at these things. The biggest problem is that the standard Supernova, your Mark I, doesn't have that Endosteel chassis, and every single one of them afterwards do. So what I end up doing quite often, at least for clients, is that they bring in one of those Endosteel Supernova, and they say, well, I want a Supernova. So I sit down and, strip out what's on there, and set up 17 tons of armor to shoulders, stick the big guns back in the arms, and it's going to be able to fight. It's basically an alternate to that Sea Fox design with armored shoulders and a little bit more heat sinks. Another thing that I'd have to throw into the ring if I were to start testing different versions of the Supernova. There's also one where the arms are equipped with claws and you've got triple strength myomer running throughout the body. And it's got all sorts of other fancy gadgets in order to keep the heat running. So the triple strength myomer remains active. Getting hit by a claw of a 90-ton mech is going to be quite scary, and this one should be fast enough to get into it with other assault mechs. So this is a kind of thing that is in the 9 to 10 range in the silly 10 scale. There are enough variants of the Supernova to make things interesting when they come into the shop, and looking at them, you can see that they can change the course of the battle with how efficient they are and how good most of those variants are. There's none of them that I would say are really subpar or that will not be able to form an anchor for your various forces. It's not an Omni-Mech. That's its biggest problem when you look at the entire clan force. Could you make it an Omni-Mech? Well, you would probably need a decent amount of work, and it wouldn't be called the Supernova anymore, or you'd call it the Omni-Nova or something along those lines. But it would still be quite decent if you did. It's also not the hardest mech to repair or to upgrade. As long as you've got Endo Steel for any of the upgrade kits of it, you would be able to do pretty much whatever you want with a Supernova as long as it's in the shop long enough. So I thank you very much for listening to me for so long. I hope you guys have a very nice rest of your day, and I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.